Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, sisters and brothers. This is Peter Matthews with our show, Standing Up for Economic and Social Justice. And we have going to have some guests this evening from the immigrant rights group out of Sacramento and statewide, as well as they're going to be talking about Workers' Day on May 1st and what the symbolism of that is and what the reality of it is and where it began, because a lot of Americans don't even know that there's a Workers' Day on May 1st. They think of Labor Day as being in September. And there's an interesting reason for that. We'll be talking about it. But let's introduce you to the show. As you know, we're starting up this series now. We had quite a few shows in the fall on economic, social, and environmental justice. And now it's time to go forward with this new season. Today is the kickoff start, and we'll be on here every Thursday evening from 7:30 to 8:30. This evening we'll be cutting it short slightly till about 8:15. We'll go with the show, and then we'll have to adjourn and sign off and say goodbye to you, because at 8:30 I'll be interviewed by Sky News London to talk about the first 100 days of the Trump administration. What has happened in the first 100 days, pros and cons, and what some of the major issues are that Trump has been trying to deal with, and how it's affected us and how it might affect us. We'll look at all those things in quite about 5 or 6 minutes at 8:30 to about 8:35, 8:40. On Sky News London. So the way you reach that and stream it live is you go to news.sky.com. News, N-E-W-S.sky, S-K-Y.com, C-O-M. And then you'll see the live streaming icon. You just click on that tab, live stream, and you'll be able to, or watch live, you'll be able to hear us and the interview with Sky News London that I'll be on. It'll be a global broadcast, actually, but I think about 7 million people get to hear that. From what I understand with their statistics. But that's what's most important, is that all of us get involved, whether we're just a handful of people starting up change for positive justice and social justice and economic justice, or whether it be millions of people marching for it, as many people did across the globe last weekend, this coming weekend on the climate change march. And then a couple of weeks later, we're going to be having a march, actually May the 1st. That's not that far away. We're going to have a march on the International Workers' Day to try to expose the inequities and injustices of the working people in America and much of the world, and see what we can do about those things. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the issues of relevance here to working people and to the immigrant community, and then we'll bring in our guests. That's be Al and Fatima from Sacramento will be on here soon. So let's talk a bit about the President Donald Trump's issue positions on undocumented workers, and how he campaigned for almost a whole year on vowing to deport undocumented workers, as he called them, illegal immigrants. And at first he said he would only do that to those who have actually committed a crime or been convicted of one. Then he went forth and changed that criteria to those who have been accused of a crime. And now his deportation forces in the government departments that handle our immigration are actually picking up parents, mothers of children who are U.S. citizens. The children have been born here. Their parents came here illegally a few years ago, and yet the families have been living here, paying taxes, working hard, and actually contributing to our economy. Now they're being picked up by the Immigration and Naturalization Service and Customs Service, the ICE agents and others, who are basically deporting them across the border mainly into Mexico, when these mothers have American-born children who are U.S. citizens, and these moms love them just as much as any other mom does her children. And these moms are being snatched away from their kids and taken across the border to fulfill President Trump's pledges in the campaign to deport illegal immigrants. We need to look at the political economy of that. What is it that has driven illegal immigration to the U.S. in the last few decades? And it has to do with free trade, not fair trade, such as NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, and neoliberal policies that put many countries in the global south into debt by banks that are based all over the world, mostly owned by the global north, the rich countries. And many times when you get NAFTA attracting manufacturing jobs from the United States, many people here lose their jobs to low-wage workers across the border. And NAFTA also encourages exports of American government-subsidized corn, which was dumped in Mexico, driving out the Mexican independent farmer, the small farmer, mostly an organic farmer, out of business. And those farmers lost their farms, They went to the city to work in the factories opened up by General Motors, which pay very little money in Mexico, the Mexican workers building our cars. And those folks had to come, some of them came over here to make a living because they couldn't make a living over there. I think President Trump ought to be talking about those things. So it looks to me like we're getting our phone call now from Al and Fatima. Hello, Fatima and Al, are you on the line? Hello, could you speak up, please? Good to hear from you. Is this Fatima and Al?
Yes, this is Al.
Hello, Fatima. How are you? And how are you, Al?
Fine. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here on our show here, Standing Up for Economic, Social, and Environmental Justice. And we'd love to talk to you a bit about the issues of the day that you're concerned about. I think specifically you're trying to focus on the issues of undocumented immigration, and also the issue of Workers' Day on May the 1st, am I right? And what the symbolism of that is and how it began. So let's start with whatever topic you'd like to start with, guys. You guys take the microphone. Go for it.
Oh, go ahead, Fatima.
Fatima, go ahead.
If you want to start out giving a little background of May 1st and
Yeah, sure.
why International Workers' Day is important in both globally.
Okay. Would you like to do that, or you want me to do that? Go ahead.
Well, obviously, May Day at one point started way back in the late 1800s with regards to the Chicago big fight with workers fighting for the 8-hour day.
Yes.
And back in that period of time. And of course, there was people who took to the streets, took to the streets to resist and strike back with the fact that they wanted that right to be able to, take advantage of an 8-hour day. But in that, they arrested and they literally beat people, and also people were killed. And so they call that the Haymarket riots.
Haymarket riots, also known as the Haymarket Massacre, right?
Exactly. So with that, there was a turn in the century with regards to workers beginning to resist and organize workers. And basically that was during what was called the Industrial Revolution. And that period went on until the 30s when the right to workers representation under the National Labor Relations Act. And thereafter, things began to change as far as temperament regarding May Day. And May Day was looked upon as a socialist, communist venture. And basically, it was just working people who were fighting for workers' rights. And of course, they're going up against the mighty industrial, steel mills and the coal mines and many of the largest manufacturers that are based out of Chicago. So, in essence, along the way back after many years, the labor movement switched to Labor Day on the first week of September. So, what we're looking at now is that, of course, labor is a big fight with a strong attack by the corporations now, with wanting to take back many of the benefits of working people today, which is Social Security, pensions, and workmen's compensation, state disability, many of those important benefits. So here we come to the whole question of the North American Free Trade Agreement back during 1994, when Bill Clinton and also the Bush and the Democrats and Republicans pushed that economic policy where it allowed the free flow of goods from the United States to Canada and Mexico. And of course, Mexico is a very, impoverished country, and the whole idea was we're going to develop jobs. Well, that wasn't necessarily true, because along the way until up to this point, what the NAFTA did, they call it the NAFTA, they basically...
NAFTA, right? You said NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, N-A-F-T-A. Yes, go ahead.
Right. That's correct. So basically what's happened is that with the North American Free Trade Agreement, that allowed the corporations to begin to ship pre-cut clothing, manufacturing of goods into the Mexican market in the manufacturing industry. But it also allowed the opening of the elimination of the agrarian reform that allowed farmers to farm small plots of minimum large agricultural land to grow corn and corn products.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what happens is that this is original corn. So what we have now with the opening of the North American Free Trade Agreement, it eliminated the General Agreement of Taxes and Tariffs, which is called the GATT.
Yeah.
So by doing that, the corporations had a free flow of goods, but at the same time, this allowed the whole issue of migration, environmental rights, and human rights, civil rights, and workers' rights. They wouldn't allow for any punitive violation by corporations in regards to workers' rights in Mexico and in this country. So the bottom line, what happens is that the Midwest farmers, who are huge in the Midwest, who we subsidize as American taxpayers,
Mm-hmm.
with regards to biogenetic corn,
Yes.
GMO corn.
So you're talking about GMO corn, produced by huge producers of agribusiness in the Midwest, subsidized by the United States government, subsidized.
Correct. So what happens is that the agreement between Mexico and the U.S. that they would take it to the competitive field, because obviously our tax dollars in subsidizing that industry, corn industry and agriculture, allowed them to fluctuate the market. By doing that, they allowed them to open up the border to begin to import into the Mexican economy with the good wishes of the Mexican government.
Mm-hmm.
In light of that, to dump millions and millions of tons of GMO corn into the marketplace.
Yes.
For manufacturing and production. What did I do? Well, it eliminated and competitively the agricultural sector in Mexico, which is the farmers,
yes,
campesinos, farm workers, and therefore they lost out and being forced, they're not being able to sell that corn competitively. So basically they went out of business, even though they eliminated the collective nature of agriculture by saying, well, now the land belongs to you, you can sell it and survive with your 5 or 6 or 10 acres of land. So by doing that, and not being able to no longer harvest competitively corn, original corn, one would say, not only to the Mexican market but also abroad. So what happens is it forces the millions and millions of Mexicans to go north. Mexico City, Guadalajara, Tijuana, and Mexicali,
yes,
and cross the border illegally, they call it.
Yes.
So all this is now a whole issue of many Americans in this country ask the question, where did all these Mexicans and brown-skinned people come from, and why? Well, the reason is economics.
Yes.
On both ends. For the corporations' benefit of greed, and also for the Mexican government being able to say, we'd rather have our people leave than deal with the whole question of decent working wages, which is not the case to this day. For example, in San Quintin, Baja California, many of those workers, there's about 150,000 workers that are in that area who are now fighting for and against being paid $7 and $8 a day for 13 hours. They called for an international boycott disco. But getting back to this whole question of what's happening today, now we have the government who in the 1940s to the 1960s, mid-60s, they had what they call the Bracero.
The Bracero program, yes.
Bracero program. And basically what that did was have people contract, with the Mexican government, the U.S. government, with what's now considered Homeland Security, and also the large agricultural workers, growers in the country, especially in California. So basically they had a new slave legal system of being able to have people come and go back when they're done with them and not allowing any real benefits.
Yes.
On top of that, they stole 10% of their wages and supposedly was offsetted and sent to the Wells Fargo Bank. The Wells Fargo Bank then sent it to the Mexican Bank in Mexico. And to this day, millions of those workers in that Bracero program lost out all their retirement and their savings, and the Mexican government couldn't respond and didn't want to respond to what happened to to that, those millions and millions and millions of dollars that they were their savings for them. But now
Yes.
we have our own. We were one of the founders of the United Farm Workers Union. Chavez back then, and the union leaders like the Filipinos, Larry Leon,
yes,
and Philip Vera Cruz, who fought against that program. So that allowed us to be able to organize farm workers without having to be replaced by what is called braceros, and now they're called guest workers.
Yes.
You come and you leave because you're a guest. And now the fact is that that program has been implemented and is continuing to be implemented with the hundreds of thousands of workers coming into this country, making it difficult to organize workers all over again.
Yes.
So in essence, we have millions and millions of people in this country who claim to at least maybe 18 to 20 million people who are now living in this country, who now have children, and children who have been born here to be American citizens, and children that come over undocumented, who are now affected with the policies of our policies of the North American Free Trade Agreement,
yes,
and the immigration policies. So that's the big dilemma with now, back in 2006, when the legislation which was called the Sensenbrenner legislation, which basically was going to be punitive against the immigrant community, and basically incarceration and deportation on a massive scale. Well, you know what's happened in the last 8 years? There's been at least 3 million people who have been deported, and also this incarceration that we're talking about, and it continues today. Where at the same time, those workers have made California one of the largest economies, the sixth largest economy
in the world. In the world.
And California being the major agricultural base that feeds people in the whole country and outside the country by now importing a lot of our goods into Mexico, vice versa.
Yes.
So here now we have Trump, who comes into office with all this hate and spewing all this racism, and dividing workers and blaming workers that they're taking our jobs, which is not true.
Right.
The issue here is corporations unwilling to pay
a living wage. That's right, a decent wage. Yeah. Unwilling to pay a decent wage. Yeah.
Yeah, and now in Mexico, the Walmarts, Costco's, all these corporations that are U.S. corporations in the food grocery industry now control 68% of commerce in Mexico. And basically, the other U.S. corporations, with NAFTA opening up the whole question of venture into the water, as energy, and also oil, is now being controlled by the U.S. and foreign transnational corporations, also paying today 80 pesos a day, which is equivalent to less than $4 a day, in which many of the workers work, as I indicated, 13 or 12 hours a day, and in slave conditions, in which we have now these 5 hours from the Mexican border, or at the Mexican border, where people are saying, what do we do in order to survive when we're in this situation? So May Day in 2006, where in Sacramento there was 52,000 people, and they came out of the woodwork to say, we want to be a part of this country, since we have invested our lives and also sent more than $25 billion a year to the Mexican economy. The Mexican government is pleased to be able to force that migration and go along with that without having to deal with standard wage levels and prevailing wage levels or minimum wage levels that are decent wages where people do not have to migrate, when you have these transnational corporations now consuming more so and co-opting a monopoly of this commercialization. At the same time, people are suffering the consequences with incarceration because we want to build and extend a wall, and at the same time deal with this whole question of the new Bracero program called the Guest Worker Program.
Yes.
So now we have all these millions of workers who are really scared and fearful right now with the question of Trump coming in and spewing all this hate and all this racism and blaming them when it's not true. And the fact is that Fatima will address that in regards to why this May Day the, the, the workers are going to have to decide, and they've decided to be at least thousands of people and probably more, and hundreds of thousands in Los Angeles and Chicago and New York and Denver and Washington State, Oregon, and in the Valley here in San Joaquin Valley,
Yes.
and of course the Bay Area. So this is a groundswell and a message that we're all workers, and from there to us there are no borders. They call us immigrants, but we're not immigrants. We never were immigrants. We've been here thousands of years as it relates to coming from indigenous people.
Indigenous people, yeah.
And now we have from the state of Oaxaca that hundreds of thousands of people in all over the country, but more so here in California, now in the agriculture, but they've gone beyond the agriculture. They've gone to other industries.
Yes.
So we, the American people, those of us who are American citizens, okay, and see this happening, and we see the pain of the families and the children.
It's horrendous. The pain is terrible. And I must get, if you don't mind me interrupting for 1 second, I wanted to relate an incident in my class recently. I was in lecture. I teach political science at Cypress College, and one of my students raised her hand today, and she said, Mr. Matthews, I was talking about these very issues, about the export of jobs, but also NAFTA and free trade that has decimated the middle class in Mexico and over here. And she was saying, Mr. Matthews, you know, with all of this, the rise of President Trump and the kind of, like you mentioned, some of the hatred that's been spewed from some of his supporters, and him blaming undocumented people for the downturn of the economy, she said, you know, my young daughter is 6 years old, Mr. Matthews, and she was asking me, Mom, could this happen to you? Could I lose you, Mom, just like that woman on television was taken away from her children by the government? That happened to many people, right, recently? Undocumented people who had children born here, and they had been here for many years paying taxes. Many of them had committed no crime. Don't forget the young man who was a dreamer, who was grabbed from McDonald's and taken across the border when, under the DACA, he was able to stay here, according to when President Obama arranged that. So you've raised some really important issues, Al. And this Workers' Day is so important because we're drawing attention to workers across the world who are exploited by these multinational corporations, certainly in Mexico, but also Indonesia, in other countries like China, where the workers are paid a little over $1 an hour to make that iPhone, to put the iPhone together. And the Apple makes $400,000 profit from each employee across the world, especially in the global South. So it's amazing and great to have you here to talk about these things from a perspective of the International Workers' Day, and also the undocumented immigrants who have come here as migrants, who actually, they lived here. Like you said, most of the folks who have come here undocumented, they have ancestors going back thousands of years. They're the indigenous people, many of them, or have indigenous ancestry. Am I right?
And Fatima will tell you, because
go right ahead, Fatima.
She comes from, like all of us. Go ahead, Fatima.
Yes, please.
You know, back to the migration caused by these transnational corporations that go and exploit people globally now because of global capitalism.
Yes.
I think people tend to forget that migration isn't something that people just wake up from one day to another and say, hey, today I'm just going to move to a completely different part of the world. You know, the language barrier, the culture, the different atmosphere. I mean, migration is caused because of the necessity to survive, and I think a lot of people aren't really they don't really empathize with the migrant community, because they come here, first of all they sacrifice their life. Speaking of Mexico, crossing the border, the militarization that we see around the world in our borders, they're killing people from left and right. It's not an easy thing for people to migrate. And then they come to a completely country when they're where they are still being exploited.
Mm-hmm.
They're still living under in the shadows in fear. I mean, with these mass deportations, and it didn't just start with Trump. It started with
Yes.
Obama's administration.
Yes, it did.
Where he deported over 3 million
yes.
families.
More than any other president. More than any other president until his time.
Yes, and 1 million U.S. citizen children that were deported with their parents that people just seem not to see in between the lines. But again, it didn't start with Trump. But
right.
the operation and the plan that Trump has to beat Obama's record is traumatic to our community.
Yes.
And what we're seeing now, it seems like it's another political agenda of systematic oppression, because how Brother Al was speaking about the H-2A guest worker program. Well, now in our most recent headlines, they're saying how labor in the fields, how agricultural workers are not showing up, and millions to billions of crops are being wasted. They're going bad. Yes, they're going wasted. They're going bad. Well, that's a part of this H-2A guest worker program that we see has picked up more number of workers from Michoacan, from all of Latin America, to come and take, pin worker against worker. You have the undocumented workers that are here, but yet they want to have a complete control of the agricultural sector. And how do you do that? Well, the guest worker program is a modern day slaver program that just, I visit the camps in Santa Maria this past summer, and the conditions to have a worker, it was like a prison. I mean, we're talking about workers coming, not criminals.
No.
But the living conditions, and there was young kids from like 16 years old.
Yes.
Coming, and all the requirements by the federal law in order to keep the program and qualify for these programs, you have to have like a kitchen, a functional kitchen. You have to have the proper beddings. But what we've seen at these camps in Santa Maria,
yes,
they were gated. They were really outdated. The kitchen was not functioning. They didn't even have electricity in the kitchen. So then you ask, well, what are these workers? What are they eating? And it's seriously like a prison, like a encampment.
Yes.
And is this how we really treat workers? I mean, workers that are making in the trillions of profit with their hands, and I mean,
yes,
agricultural workers are exposed to some of the most harsh conditions
and pesticides and chemicals and the harsh conditions of nature. Yes, you're right.
The actual labor, they break their backs for California to be top 6 most wealthy in the world. So just May 1st is really important.
Yes.
And it's really important because it goes beyond just our indigenous people or Asians, or it goes beyond our ethnics. It's because we are working class and we're part of the poor working class.
Yes.
I mean, when a mother has to choose between paying a bill or buying groceries at her home, and she's working 50 hours a week and can't afford the proper child care.
Yes.
I mean, there's
something really wrong. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, and this has to be pointed out. Absolutely. Yes.
This whole corporate agenda is there's no moral direction, and we must take a stand together and collectively and fight back and resist.
Yes. Where are the marches taking place? Can you list the different cities here in California?
All the way from the Mexican border, in any major city or even small cities, small town community, they're having their own protests, demonstrations on May Day. That would be, say, Calexico in San Diego, Chula Vista, in Los Angeles, then Bakersfield, the coast of the Salinas, Watsonville, and into
Yes.
They're Stockton, Modesto, Sacramento, and the Bay Area,
San
Oakland,
Francisco.
San
Yes.
Francisco. They're all over the United States. They're in Chicago, Washington,
New York.
Seattle.
Right, and that's going to come up on Monday, May 1st. Am I right?
Right, and many workers are going to have to sacrifice, make that decision of going on what we call work stoppage for that one day.
Yes.
And they're going to try, like they did last time, to encourage their employers to shut down the business so that it allows them, if he wants to continue having those workers, to go out and say, send a message to
the community as a whole, the country as a whole, yes, and the world.
Right. And the very fact of all this is, you mentioned many of the conditions that these workers work in, this whole outcry about, the agricultural corporations are saying we're losing because we can't find the workers and we can't, have the food, fall on the ground and rot. And we're saying that is propaganda because in some of these locations and areas is 20 to sometimes 18% unemployment.
Yes.
And you have people who are looking for jobs, but the issue is if the corporations and agricultural major manufacturers in Mexico, if they paid a decent wage,
that's right,
which is what they're asking for in San Quintin on these strawberries, and Driscoll is buying all these strawberries,
yes,
pretending that they're not responsible, and all these farmers are saying, well, what do they want? Well, you're paying them $8 and $9 a day for 12, 13 hours.
I was going to ask you to be specific. Excuse me, Al, I was going to ask you, if you don't mind, to tell us how much a Mexican worker gets paid when they work in Walmart in Mexico, or when they work in the fields in Mexico, and also when they work at General Motors in Mexico, if possible, a GM plant. Could you give us some numbers on that?
Yeah, they have a national minimum wage for workers at Walmart, workers at the agricultural fields that are, food is being harvested for also Mexico as a nation, but they're exporting a lot of that into this country. All the produce you see, and the majority, if you look at the label,
yes,
it's either now coming from Chile, also doing the same thing,
yeah,
and also coming from Mexico. But when you look at it and they say it's organic, then you say, well, really, what constitutes, that we're really getting, organic, harvested food? The issue here is if they pay a decent wage and not the 80 pesos, which is equivalent to, if you take, divide 18.50 to $19 pesos against $1,
mm-hmm,
you're going to get that equivalent, less than five, let's say.
Less than $5 a day, Al?
Right. Less than $5 a day for 12 or 13 hours.
That's horrible, isn't it?
After that, you have the sexual abuse of
yes,
women
yes,
who are vulnerable to these people because they see that they can take advantage of them.
mm-hmm,
But you mentioned a very important issue. That's the chemicals that are being utilized here in this country, and
yes,
also, but more so in Mexico. Mexico, there's no such thing as the rule of law. There's no such thing as the rule of law. Whatever they do, and Fatima mentioned the people that are being killed because they've been suppressed by the military in Mexico, because we support the funding through the Plan Medida through Papa George Bush, who were saying we're going to fight the drug problem. But that wasn't the issue of fighting drug problem. They could foresee that along the way, the more they tighten the belt and starving people on cheap wages, not paying decent wages, that people are going to rebel into social movements.
yes,
And that's happened with people in cities and the industrial base, but now in agriculture, because what they got from our government is that billions and billions of dollars to arm the Mexican military.
yes,
During that period, they killed more than 95,000 people. They've been assassinated, murdered, killed, and at least 28,000 people have been disappeared. Nobody says anything about that. But if they kill 19 people here, and that's horrible, regardless, because it's spilling blood of innocent people. Well, what about the people next door to our neighbor, who me and people are saying, why are they coming here when we're coming here because of our economic policies.
That's right.
It relates to billions of dollars to arm the military to suppress, like the teachers union who are being privatized, and the oil that is being privatized,
Yeah.
and everything that is beneficial to the Mexican people.
Yes,
Exactly.
yes.
43 estudiantes de Ayotzinapa.
Oh yes, the students that we heard about, right? Getting disappeared students. Go ahead, please. Go ahead, Fatima.
Here we have a college
Yes,
in the rural areas in Mexico. It was established back in 1938, simply to keep people in the farms by offering them a college where they could grow with the technology along the way in order to be able to sustain and be a part of the rural communities.
Yes.
And not leave to go to the urban centers like Mexico City,
right,
which already has more than 24 million people,
yes,
and also Guadalajara and other cities. But in this case, they're forced to leave, and because there's no educational value for them once they get the degree, when they're going to end up working selling corn on the street, selling cucumbers in the street,
barely surviving.
Whatever they can to survive.
Yeah.
So
Al, if you don't mind, Al, you've made a really important and strong case here, and I'd like to hear from Fatima for a couple of minutes because we have to sign off here, unfortunately, a little early today. Next Thursday we'll be on for the full hour, and we'll have more time for call-ins. But today I've got to go a little bit early because I'm speaking on Sky News London about President Trump's first 100 days that's coming up. But let's hear from Fatima to kind of wrap this up a bit. Fatima, please. Go ahead.
Yes, again, all these social movements that are happening worldwide interconnect, and it's this capitalist system, this beast that we're all fighting. So the sooner we interconnect these struggles and unite, I feel that we can have a real positive that outcome that we're all seeking. But just to go back to the 43 missing students of Ayotzinapa, in the latest investigation, they said that evidence was found because, this was a massacre. It was really a massacre. The police was going there, and they had the military and police were there, and they only had one job, and that was to get rid of all of them. They didn't go in there and try to bring peace or do any type of an investigation. They flat out just started shooting at the bus when they got there. But recently,
Go ahead.
Parents on regular basis, but they said that they found almost 200 kilos of heroin in that bus that was being shipped to the U.S. government. When the investigators from Argentina started to discover all of these, they started to discover this evidence, they were kicked out of Mexico. They were told to leave, and the investigation ended.
Could you do me a favor, please? We're almost out of time. Can you tell us what these students were about? Who were these students? What were they doing that they incurred this kind of wrath? Tell us about the students. Yes.
The students, like Al mentioned, they come from some of the most poorest places in Mexico. They're indigenous. Spanish is their second language. And they go to these rural escuelas rural, where they learn to be teachers. But not only do they learn to be teachers, they are like social promoters, I would call them socialists. They just want to see all the power go back to the people.
Yes.
Benito Juarez, just like Benito Juarez,
yes.
Emiliano Zapata, just like them, they just want, they believe that the land belongs to those that work it, and
right.
not these corporate agendas that we're seeing today. So,
yes.
They go on and they become teachers, and they stay in these schools because these are the only schools that we're talking about, the poorest people in Mexico. This is the only way that they can seek a higher education, and they love to teach. And they're full of resistance, and they're the ones that denounce the injustice and denounce the corruption and impunity of the Mexican government.
So these students were real activists and leaders and social justice warriors. And that's the reason they paid the price, or are paying the price. This is very, very important for people to know this. And I'm so sorry we're almost out of time here. So I wanted to thank both of you We're going to have you back again, I'm sure, and along with other people in your movement to talk about these things that are so important to not just us, but of course the Mexican people, people all over the world, and also right here in our own hometown of Long Beach, Los Angeles, and Sacramento, and all over California. We're neighbors. For goodness sake, we're physical neighbors with Mexico, and we should know about these things. Many American people are not informed about the injustice of free trade and the injustice of driving the wages down in Mexico and exploiting people by the multinational corporations, mostly based in the US and around the world, owned by the corporate 1% elite. So I want to thank you both very much. And is anything else you'd like to add to this in a minute or two?
Well, all I want to say to people who are listening to us, go out on May Day on Monday upcoming and join us, regardless whoever you are, join in solidarity on that day.
Excellent. Thank you so much, and we'll say good night right now and talk to you again, okay?
Okay.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye. Good night.
You too. Bye.
Okay, folks, that's our broadcast for the evening. We had a couple of really important guests, and we'd like to keep the dialogue going as we go on the next week and on throughout the weeks. On Thursday night, 7:30 p.m., please tune in at petermathews11 and take part in the discussion after we have the phone lines open next time around. Unfortunately, I have to leave a little bit early because I'm going to be on Sky News London to talk about Trump's first 100 days. And you can tune in to news.sky.com if you'd like to hear the interview. Thank you so much. Peter Matthews saying good night.